Welcome to Let's Hear It.
Let's Hear It is a podcast for and about the field of foundation and nonprofit communications, produced by its two co-hosts, Eric Brown and Kirk Brown. No relation.
Well said, Eric, and I'm Kirk.
And I'm Eric.
The podcast is sponsored by the Communications Network and the Lumina Foundation.
We're talking to people about their work and what's happening in the field with the hopes of making this growing arena just a little bit more accessible to us all.
You can find Let's Hear It on any podcast subscription platform. You can find us on Twitter at Let's Hear It Cast, and you can email us at hello@letshearitcast.com.
Let us know if you have any thoughts about what you hear today, including people we should have on the show.
And if you like the show, please rate us on Apple Podcasts so that more people can find us.
So let's get on to the show.
And we're back. Welcome in again to Let's Hear It. You found us once again. Welcome to the couch. Welcome to the conversation.
Welcome to the couch? What is this, therapy?
Maybe it is.
Okay.
Maybe it is.
All right, welcome to the couch.
There's a campfire. There's a couch. There's a warm light. There's,
Talk
there's
about your
drinks,
mother.
There's, appetizers. How's it going, Mr. Brown?
It is going, sir. It's going, my boon companion. My hail fellow well met. How are you, sir?
So I'm good, and I'm ready to do some cultural wing walking, if you will. I'm ready to just get out of the wing and see where it takes us. So tell us what's ahead, because once again, we've got much to talk about.
I had a conversation with Jeff Chang, we are on the board of the Narrative Initiative together. And Jeff's a senior advisor at Race Forward. He leads the Butterfly Lab for Immigrant Narrative Strategy. He is, as I said to him in our conversation, a cultural wing walker. He one of those people who walks out on the wings of planes while they're flying, because he is an observer of culture and he just gets into it in ways that are exciting and interesting, and he's someone that whom we can learn so much from. He's an amazing guy, really fun, and I think we had a pretty dynamic conversation. We had this conversation, and I should note this, right after the Oscars. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who follow Let's Hear It, there are occasional gaps between when we do the interview and when it ends up being posted. But so this conversation happened right after the Oscars, and for those of you who don't remember, things happened at the Oscars. Chris Rock had something happen, and Will Smith was there, and his wife Jada Pinkett Smith were there and engaged in it, and it was a cultural sensation. And it's interesting because I mentioned this to someone and they had forgotten, and I'm thinking, oh wow, you got to be kidding me. But still, this may be a good time for us all to refresh our memories about what happened at the Oscars and its relationship with race and narrative and culture and engagement and all of these other things. And Jeff helps by just reading his books and speaking to him is helping me to make sense of where we are a little bit.
And Jeff's many accomplishments are too numerous to even recite. So we will point you to jeffchang.net, where you can see Jeff's work and read about his background, what he's been involved with. And to find Jeff on Twitter, it's at Zentronics, Zentronix. Please find him. Please check him out. And as you're about to hear, this is quite a contributor to, a lot. Yeah. So this is Jeff Chang on Let's Hear It.
Welcome to Let's Hear It. My guest today is author, journalist, and cultural wing walker, Jeff Chang.
What's a wing walker?
It's someone who gets on the side of a plane and walks along the wing as the plane is flying. Or,
Got it. Okay.
A cultural pulse taker. Are you the Zeitgeist reader?
Whoa. Yeah. That's crazy.
I don't know. You are way more than all those things, Jeff. So thanks so much for coming on. Let's Hear It, my friend. It's great to talk to you.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. That was a crazy introduction. I don't know if I can live up to any of that. Wing walking.
If you don't walk wings in the next 30 minutes, you failed.
Whew, okay. Well, let's take off. Let's definitely take off
There
here.
we go. Well, you've had quite the journey. You've been inside the, I don't know what you would call it. Well, you were in the academy. You were the executive director of the Institute for Diversity in the Arts at Stanford University, which sounds pretty fancy. You were vice president for narrative arts and culture at Race Forward, where you're still a senior advisor, and you've written a whole bunch of books. If you don't mind, I'm just going to list them or some of them for folks. Can't Stop, Won't Stop: A History of the Hip Hop Generation. We Gonna Be All Right: Notes on Race and Resegregation. And there's one more that I wrote down and I can't find it, but and there's a whole bunch.
It's out there. Yeah, it's called Who We Be.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Who We Be.
Yeah.
Let's start with the early days,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. I want to see how you got from there to here, because it's such an interesting bunch of things that you've done. So you grew up in Hawaii,
Mm-hmm. In Honolulu, Hawaii.
in
Yes.
Honolulu, and you are part Native Hawaiian and part Chinese. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
That's me. Yeah.
What was that experience? I've been to Hawaii as an outsider. I know that I understand almost exactly zero of the cultural experience of people of Hawaii, and so I'd be curious to know what your growing up there was like and how that's informing your own sense of race and identity.
Such a good question. There's so much to talk about, and actually, there's probably a book in this somewhere. But I on my Chinese side, I'm seventh generation on the islands, and on my Hawaiian side, obviously, been there thousands of years. So the family that I come from is huge. It's a big family. We've intermarried in all the ways that are possible, like all the combinations you can imagine are within the family. So when we take a picture, we kind of look like the United Nations. It's pretty crazy. And for that reason, that's obviously shaped my understanding of what can be possible, I guess, in community. It's not like you don't have tensions in family, that just like you don't have, like you have tensions in community, you have tensions in family. But at the same time, the idea that everybody can belong to each other, right, is something that probably I'd learned at a really young age, and certainly it's definitely at the core of my being and what I'm about. So, when I look at questions these days, like of segregation or of questions of equity or justice, racial equity or racial justice, it comes literally, it's informed by the way I grew up and by my family histories. We could go back generations if you want to, Eric. We probably don't have the time to do that, but just suffice it to say, I think that in that regard, there's a sort of, I'm very aware that even this notion of America, right, is it's in some ways an ideal, and it's been a weapon as well, right? It's been wielded to take away the rights and and the culture of my family's, the language, right? Americanization is taken away language, and it's only now that me later in life that I can come back to it and try to find some sort of reconciliation. But those are the kinds of things that motivate me, is kind of thinking about what the previous 7 generations of my family have been able to do, and thinking forward to like the next 7 generations, and what we need to leave for them.
Then you came to California.
I did, yeah.
The mainland. I don't know do we call it the mainland?
Yeah, we used to call it the mainland, but then folks were starting to say in the 90s, Hawaii's the mainland, so
Right.
we'll call it the continent, which is another way of describing it that's a little bit less fraught with connotations of, Maine or not so
Right.
Maine or periphery or whatever. Yeah.
I had a feeling as the word came out of my mouth that there was
No,
something.
it's really funny. There's a great poem by this guy named Joseph Balaz who's like, Hawaii is the mainland. So
Right.
yeah. So and then we were all like, ooh, that was one of those moments where we're all like, wow, that really reframes things for us. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So you came to California and you went to Cal, go Bears.
Yes.
And then you started hip hop. You were DJ. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You're hip hop DJ, and you started a hip hop record label.
Yep.
So I don't know, are a lot of Chinese Hawaiian hip hop labels, or speaking
It-
of cultural kind of, I don't know, experiences, how came you, Jeff, to start a hip hop label? How do you tell me about hip hop? Tell me about your relationship to hip hop.
Oh, well, I came to Cal, and it was actually, this is going to date me, but what the heck, it was my birthday yesterday, so I have to own my middle age now. Um, the period that I came to Berkeley was during the anti-apartheid movement. So I found myself drawn into that backwards, actually. I'd always been a huge fan of music. I grew up on, Hawaiian folk music, sort of back to the land type stuff that my cousins, my older generation of cousins were into, sort of folk rock, jazz rock type of stuff that was coming from the islands. And then really started figuring out where I was going when I started hearing reggae, started hearing like Bob Marley and Peter Tosh and Bunny Wailer, and, the folks who are coming out with the roots music during the 70s. And, we really didn't have anything to claim until hip hop came out, something that was our own generation that other generations didn't understand, that got my parents angry when I played loud. You know what I mean? All the great things, right? So, and hip hop was interesting because it kind of spoke to this like intensification of the urbanization of the islands. I grew up in Honolulu in the eastern suburbs and of Honolulu, and spent a lot of time on the countryside too as well, because my grandparents are on that side of the island. But during the 80s, during the 70s and the 80s, there's a lot of development, a lot of urbanization very quickly. And hip hop kind of gave us a voice, so it was almost a pre-political voice, to be able to say, hey, what's all this stuff going up? What's all this concrete going up? I'm going to spray paint my name on it. And, when I play this stuff loud, it echoes right through, through all the streets and stuff. And it was just amazing for us to have that sound coming from New York City and Los Angeles down to us. So hip hop became the thing that I think our generation grew up on. And when I moved to the continent, I moved right into the middle of a huge, amazing scene in the Bay Area, so jump right into it. I was literally becoming a DJ, learning how to become a DJ. That was happening during the nighttime. And then I'd, wake up in the afternoon, skip math class, and, end up like on Sproul Plaza where all these protests were taking place. So that was kind of how it all came together for me. And ultimately the two kind of came together in hip hop, the sort of thing of finding our not just our sort of aesthetic voice, but our political voice through groups like Public Enemy and Boogie Down Productions, KRS-One, Queen Latifah, MC Light, all these folks, Sister Souljah, articulated kind of the feelings that we were feeling. And that's how I came to become a DJ and to help start up a label that was called Soul Sides, with folks like DJ Shadow and Black Alicious, rest in peace, Get the Gab, and Lyrics, my friend Lyrics Born from Berkeley, and Latif, the True Speaker from Oakland. And I'm happy to say that another person in our crew, Joseph Patel, just won the Oscar for Summer of Soul. So like we had a pretty amazing crew, and those guys, taught me so much. And I still rely on those days a lot, in terms of thinking about what I need to be as an artist and how to be able to carry the narrative forward of, the America that we can have if we choose to move in that direction.
Well, you as you talk about this political voice, I'm sensing the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I was there in the 90s too, except it took me a long time to go to college, so I'm a little older than you are, Jeff. I wandered in the wilderness for quite some time, but
That's not, you were learning, man. It was part of your journey. You weren't wandering. You were finding. You were finding.
I was learning. That's what it was. What was that political voice, and what was it that you felt that this cultural opportunity gave you the chance to say? What were you trying to communicate?
It was the 80s were a really intense period, and this is sort of the period where you begin to see the culture wars that we're living in today. Where you have this far right, and even actually Democratic Party folks pushing back against, the racial justice work that really came up out of the post-war period in the US. And of course, peaks with the civil rights movement and the flowering of the Black Power movement, which in turn kind of, inspires the Asian American movement, the Chicano movement, the American Indian movement, the LGBTQ movement, right? The women's movement. So, there's a massive kind of backlash against that during the 1980s. And that's, I think, what a lot of folks were reacting to. You hear it in the music of Public Enemy, certainly. And this idea of bringing back the image and the words and the teaching of somebody like Malcolm X, sampling him so that he's saying too black, too strong, and that giving us sort of a sense of agency at that moment. And I think coming out of the anti-apartheid movement, moving into confronting racism at that particular moment, underrepresentation of, people of color, as well as the lack of ethnic studies, the lack of knowledge about the communities that we come from, the rise in anti-Asian violence that was happening during the 80s, all of those different types of things, were shaping who we are. And so hip hop actually gave us a way to be able to speak to all of those kinds of things, to be able to assert a different kind of way of being against all of these different types of forces that were coming down on us.
Well, it clearly had a lot of power. You were talking about how the left was challenged by it and didn't know what to make of it. Remember, who can forget in the 90s, Bill Clinton and Sister Souljah? Mm-hmm. It almost seems like the perfect example of the baby boomer culture not having any idea what to make of a burgeoning sense of expression. That must have been a bomb that went off in either the hip hop community, but in just general progressive race politics. Sister Souljah must have been a head smacker.
Yeah, that moment I think was pretty profound, because then it was like, oh, we thought that this is the guy that was supposed to be cool. Like he's on Arsenio playing the saxophone and stuff, right? Like they're saying that he's about to be the first Black president and whatnot. And then he turns around and uses Sister Souljah as a way to be able to draw this line. And it's clearly a racial line. I mean, when he was saying this, Jesse Jackson was on the dais alongside him, and you could just see Jesse Jackson's face drop and him turn sour, because it was clear that he was trying to race bait at that particular moment. Sister Souljah's words were, I think, misconstrued, and she was talking in that particular moment in this interview that she had given in the Washington Times about the mentality of a gangbanger, right? At that moment. And they were flipped around to make it seem as if she was advocating killing whites, And so that was such a clear, for so many of us, that was such a clear statement that this was, in fact, it wasn't a Democrat versus Republican type of thing. It was like a generation versus a generation type of thing. And to be completely honest, and James Foreman has done great work around this, right? It's this flowering of all of these tough on crime laws in which Black communities are held up as the folks who want these laws the most. And so you're dealing with this generational friction that's happening. And that comes out, I think, in the hip hop politics of the entire decade, really rolling up into the new millennium. And I think that actually forms the shift around which we get to Black Lives Matter. But I might be getting ahead of myself here.
A little bit, but not too much,
Okay.
because after the break, we're going to kind of jump forward. We're going to do a time shift and get into the current conversation. And there are a few of them that I'd love to have. And we'll be right back with Jeff Chang. You're listening to Let's Hear It, a podcast about foundation and nonprofit communications hosted by Kirk Brown and Eric Brown. Let's Hear It is sponsored by the Communications Network, which connects, gathers, and informs the field of leaders working in communications for good. Because foundations and nonprofits that communicate well are stronger, smarter, and vastly more effective. You can find Let's Hear It online at letshearitcast.com or on Twitter at Let's Hear It Cast. Thanks for listening, and now back to the show. And we are back with cultural wing walker and reader of the Zeitgeist.
I'm going to get a t-shirt made that for both of us. That'll just say Wing Walkers. Wing Walkers Anonymous.
So Jeff, I can't decide where to start the second part of the show because I have two really big questions that I want to ask. I guess I'm going to start with what I guess we can call it the elephant in the room, but it's not. I want to talk about the other Chris Rock Oscars event, which I think it comes out of your book, We Gonna Be All Right, which you talk about when the Oscars So White gave way to Not Your Mule. And this is like, so we're not going to talk about Chris Rock right now because there was other Chris Rock stuff to talk about that I think is so, it's such an interesting way of looking at how race and conversation and culture, they grind together in certain ways. Can you just tell the story about Oscars So White and Not Your Mule? And I think that'll help us. It may help us even understand what happened 2 weeks ago. I could be wrong, but still.
Wow, Eric, it's been so long since I've actually thought about this, and I'd be really interested to kind of hear how you connect the dots to the event a couple weeks ago, for sure. I mean, that particular event, what happened was Chris was hosting the Oscars again, and he made a joke about the accounting firm that the Oscars uses to tally their, the votes and that kind of thing. And then brought up 3 young Asian kids on the stage. And so the joke was kind of at the expense of these unassuming, like poor little, like cute Asian kids who, the joke was obviously, the laugh depended upon the stereotype of, Asian Americans being all about math and being all about, the doing the little things, being the sort of folks who are pushing their pencils around, but can never necessarily be leaders, right? So a good friend, Jose Antonio Vargas, actually calls folks out on Twitter that night. He's like, what was that about? What's going on here? And actually begins to create this conversation about race and Asian Americans. The thing about Asian Americans is that throughout our history, we've always been placed between black and white. And so there's an essay in the book called The In-Betweens, in which I kind of get a little bit more into all of this. But it's a very difficult type of position to be in for Asian Americans to try to figure out what position they're going to take. We can sit on the fence and kind of watch all of this stuff happen. And that's really just the essence and the definition of privilege, right? That we can see all of these different types of racial equity battles, racial justice battles going on, and we can just sort of like quietly opt out of that. That's really, again, the definition of privilege. Or we can throw down and say, this is what we're trying to be about. We're trying to be as white as we can be, or we're trying to be as, down for racial justice and supporting the freedom struggle that's been most, deeply articulated by the Black freedom movements going all the way back, hundreds of years. We can choose to take that side. And so this quality of being in between is literally about having the option to opt out, but the necessity to be able to make a choice in order to figure out like where we're going to situate ourselves. And so anyway, in this particular debate, Mickey Kendall, who's another Twitter, sort of avatar Black woman, calls out Jose around what he's raising, right? And is like, well, you are criticizing Black folks who are over here, are making a joke, say, that might be at your expense, but Black people are not going to be your mule. They're not using a Zora Neale Hurston reference, right? it's not about Asian Americans climbing up over blackness to get to whiteness. And, Eric, this is like something that comes up over and over again. It came up in the school board, the San Francisco school board debates, and it was an undercurrent. It's an undercurrent now that is actually happening even around the Stop API Hate, kind of movement, right? It's the question of, like, are you in solidarity with the struggle, or are you invoking, grievance in order to get over on other folks of color, particularly Black folks who paved the way for you? And so that's what I think I was trying to write about in the book. I'm curious how you think it relates to, like, what happened between Chris Rock and Will Smith.
Well, boy, I'm not qualified to answer your question, but I'm going to give it a shot.
You're totally qualified, man. You're behind the microphone. Go for it. I'm here. I'm listening.
Well, notwithstanding the fact that Chris Rock seemed to have been in the middle of the eye of the hurricane in these two large cultural conversations that happened on Twitter during the Oscars. So there's just that elegance. But what seemed to me that happened at the Oscars this time was a collision of gender, toxic maleness, race for sure, two Black men engaging in a conflict on the stage in front of everybody, and disability, because Chris Rock was making fun of Jada Pinkett's disability, that she has a medical condition, and all of these things crushing together. And there you saw people taking sides. Tiffany Haddish was taking Jada's side, saying, and Will's side, saying, like, that's okay, you stand up for your women, and so on and so forth. So you ended up with this almost a triangulation of cultural conflict that is going to be very hard to untangle, and for which there feels to me to be no elegant solution. And people say, well, it's complicated. It is. And again, this is why I feel like I have very little authority to speak. But these are, it feels to me like folks are being asked to take a side in a sense that it feels like they were being asked to take a side back then as well, which is, which side are you on? Am I your mule? Am I not? Where do you fit in the racial pecking order, or in the social pecking order, or in the gender pecking order, or in the ability, that sort of thing. So as you can tell, I do not have an elegant answer to your question, but it feels like a lot of these themes are colliding and coming together in a way that feels reminiscent. It's a callback to that.
Yeah. And
I don't know, you're the cultural zeitgeist man.
Well, I mean,
tell me I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right about all of those things, and about, like, the explosion of that particular moment, has to do with all of these different types of issues that need to be unraveled. And, the problem, I think, in the way that we think about things is everything is so binary. Everything's so on, off, 1, 2, 0, 1, I guess you should say. And when we get to the intersectionalities of these different kinds of issues, I mean, the other thing that Mickey was kind of referring to here is, there's the erasure of Black women here that's happening, and all of this. And that's like, how do we bring in, gender to actually be able to talk about this? In this particular instance, like Jada, right? What is like, Jada's either the object of protection or the object of ridicule, right? Like we could talk about that. There's so many different types of things that are kind of going on. And, what's clear, I think, is that the moment that we're in right now is about the critique of all of that, and about, this masculinity, this toxic masculinity that's been in place, that we have to take down, we have to unravel, and we have to sort of put aside. But having said that, right, like, what are the proper ways for us to be able to move forward? That Chris Rock chose not to do the thing that everybody said that he should have done, which was to, bring the police into the situation, right? That feels significant in a lot of ways. What's the proper way that we move towards closure on this kind of thing? And I think that the difficulty of it all is that in this social media type of environment, there's a rush to judgment, and there's a rush to sort of create a scapegoat, and to sort of put all of that stuff away. So, Will Smith is now canceled or whatever, right? Chris Rock is selling out all of his shows on his tour, right? And that's another part of this binary that's vexing. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't, it's we just need a lot more nuance in the way that we kind of come to these different types of situations. Any of these types of moments is going to be explosive and contained, and all of it, like the seeds of further, types of moments of this, or the seeds to be able to move forward. And I think that if we could probably take the wrong lessons from this, that's the danger of what's happened. I think let me just say this in the last instance for, for the Not Your Mule example, what it led to was, like, I know Jose, he's one of my dearest friends. I love him so much. It led to I could say this, it led to a really deep soul searching, and in turn has led him into this sort of powerful kind of way of thinking about how we change the narrative for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and how we change it in particular in relationship to Black folks, the Black freedom struggle, to Black women, and what this requires of us in this moment where Black Lives Matter is still and should always be on the forefront of our minds. Like, this is really the key to moving towards racial justice for all, is recognizing that Black Lives Matter, and to recognize the contributions and the directions that the Black freedom struggle is leading us towards. So for in that, it was Jose brought us into, and Mickey brought us into a teaching moment for all of us, and that's the upside, I think, of these different types of explosive situations that might occur in the culture.
Well, when you were writing about that moment back then, you wrote, it is the continuing strangeness and difficulty of race that all of these conversations have to happen at the same time. Mm. And that was one of the other things that kind of triggered in my mind this connection point between then and now, because, again, we don't have the luxury of setting aside certain topics so that we can just deal with one of them at a time. And as a result, it gets quite messy. Or I don't know if you want to call it that. If it's fair to say that it's messy, it is just the nature of our experience that feels complicated. And it just in the few moments left, you write, your book is called "We Gonna Be All Right," which seems optimistic and almost like an aside that you would have to a good friend. How can you just explain that? Are you an optimist? Are we going to be all right? Why'd you do that?
Yeah, I did it as a tribute to the Black freedom culture that, gave me a voice, and a tribute, of course, to one of the greatest artists of all time, Kendrick Lamar, and a tribute and a nod and sort of a note of gratitude to the Black Lives Matter movement, who made it an anthem. All Right, who made it All Right, Kendrick Lamar's song All Right, into an anthem, because it's this sort of leap of imagination. It's this sort of grasping of faith, right? That if we get it together, if we get ourselves together with each other, that we'll find a way, that we'll really, move towards being all right. We're going to be all right. And so, yeah, I'm, it's hard to say that I'm a full-blown optimist or a full-blown pessimist. But you got to have hope. There's a way in which, well, I'll put it this way. I can't imagine what my ancestors were thinking 7 generations ago about what the future would look like and what, the fruits of their work would become, but I'm glad that they did, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I want to be able to leave that to my kids and to my loved ones, which don't only include the people who are blood family to me, right? Folks in my community, like people who I love and trust, and who I want to be able, who I grow from, who I learn from, and who I want to help to grow and help to learn. So, that's the thing, that's the sort of germ of the thing, that the seed of the thing that we plant for the future generations. And my job is just to be able to do a little bit of watering while I'm here.
Well, in wisdom terms, I think you are fast becoming an elder. Not in age. not in rings on the tree.
Can I say something? Can I say something about that though?
Yeah,
like in the cultures that I come from, like, you're really not allowed to say anything till you're 70. And I think that there's like wisdom in that, right? There's like beauty in that. So I'm like, I don't think I'm an elder yet. I'm certainly an elder in training. I think we all are, hopefully. But yeah, I don't have what I need to be able to be that person, but I'm trying. I have to strive for something. So yeah.
Well, if you couldn't say anything till you were 70, there sure as hell would be a lot less podcasts.
Yeah, like, just shut up until you're 70. You know what I mean? That's sort of like, that's like the culture these are the cultures that I come from. Like, what do you know? You're not 70 yet.
Well, I'm going to get there before you do, and then I'll do all sorts of talking.
Then, yeah, I'll be listening to you for like a year or two or whatever. Yeah.
Well, Jeff Chang, what a pleasure.
Oh,
We
yeah.
could have gone on for days, and we'll have to come back and do some more because I have a lot more to learn from you.
So appreciate you, Eric. Thank you for having me.
You too. That was so much fun.
And we're back. So, Mr. Brown, tell me about the travels, the journeys. How do your paths cross with Jeff, and how have you ever allowed him to get out of your sight ever? Because I can imagine just wanting to follow him around and just keep talking all the time. So tell us about your background with Jeff.
We serve on the board of the Narrative Initiative, which is an organization that was started by the Ford Foundation and Atlantic Philanthropies to help develop the use of narrative in nonprofit social change. And because Jeff is who he is, he was a natural person to be on this board. He's just, as you can hear in this conversation, an amazing guy, incredibly thoughtful. But for someone with that much insight, he's awfully polite about it. He's incredibly nice and gracious.
Man.
But what a cool guy, and what an amazing perspective he has on what's going on out there.
Well, and one of my favorite things about all these many people that have been on the podcast at this point, this piece that actually feels really consistent across all of them is how different their journeys have been to get here. And the here I'm going to talk about is communication, system thinking, narrative, how we pull these pieces together to support change. And I feel like Jeff has given us like one of the most interesting journeys. Jeff brings this perspective, and then he's pulled together all these different experiences, and hip hop becomes the starting point. I just want to hear every single thing you have to say, and then I want to follow every single thing you've done. But tell me about that part, because I feel like for Jeff, this idea that it's almost like this series of creative expressions and creative exercises, one after the other, that run the gamut of all of the work he's done. It's such a cool path to forge in this field, don't you think? Or what do you think about that?
Well, I do. And his interest in hip hop and his journey as a Chinese Hawaiian hip hop DJ, I think says a lot.
Yeah, it's so great.
Because that was an expression and a music and a politics that spoke to him at a moment when in the 90s, when many of these cultural questions were being called, and there was a real generational shift in the politics. And I think that his ability to synthesize that, to learn from it, and to interpret it is something that we need more of. Mm-hmm. Pick up his books, because they're really, really interesting.
Yeah.
When he told the story about Chris Rock's kind of previous foray into cultural excitement at the Oscars, for me anyway, I saw, wait a minute, it was just a couple of weeks ago that Chris Rock was back in it.
Yeah.
But these two episodes are an expression of how our culture, I don't know, how it looks at race and now, of course, gender and ability in ways that I think we all need to find meaning out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he's willing to wade into these conversations and to try to better help us better understand them is just another reason why we need more Jeff Changs in the world. But it's also a way to help us process all of this stuff that's coming at us. The other thing, of course, is that I can learn from a culture and a community that I'm not in, but I want to know more, and I want to be able to process that information from my perspective, so that I can participate in one way, in whatever way seems appropriate.
And the nuance that he's bringing to this, I love that conversation that you had, where he talks about this in-betweenness concept, that Asian Americans can confront. Where do I place myself on this conversation around race and narrative? And so, as the narrative initiative, how much was a conversation around race and racial identity? Then how do you see this all fitting together? And I have to say, like, that conversation you guys had about Chris Rock and Will Smith, this year's version of the Chris Rock moment.
Yeah.
Jeff is coming to this notion. It's not binary. It can't just be on, off, yes, no, right, wrong. There's much more nuance in what's going on here. And then again, thinking about that conversation you guys had about what it means to be in between, I'm just thinking to myself, this is the kind of nuance, this is the kind of thoughtful leadership, bring people into this conversation. These are the voices that I wish were dominating our cultural conversation today. And unfortunately, they're out there, but are they in the mainstream of it? I don't know. You know what I mean? But what do you think about that nuance he's bringing to that notion of what's in between, and how this conversation about race moves between all of us?
Well, as you very well know, nuance is hard, and not nuance is easy. You can say like bad, wrong, call people names, and it's so much easier to divide than it is to unite. That's why building a narrative around how complex our relationships are between gender, race, ability, you name it, is way harder than folks who are saying, oh, let's just demonize folks who don't look like us or act like us, who we don't understand. And when you drive those wedges through, then it makes it easy by disrupting to screw everything up. So building is harder than destroying. If you think about a renovation, you could take the room down to the studs in a day, and then it takes you a year to put it back together again. And I think that's what we're seeing in our politics. And unless you have people who are really firmly committed to coming together to build that room, it's very easy to divide. And what I think that Jeff does is help us make sense of what some of those differences are and what those nuances are. That doesn't make it easy to turn that into political movements per se, but it makes it easy for us I think it makes it possible for us to chart a path.
So tell me about Race Forward, because this is where Jeff, one of Jeff's professional homes is at Race Forward. And, tell me about your experiences with Race Forward and how that contributes to all this, because that definitely seems like an initiative and an organization that's well worth supporting.
Well, again, this is an organization that's helping us understand the discussions around race that are advancing understanding of a variety of issues that matter to people. And Jeff, again, is such a perfect person to participate in that. Mm-hmm. And, oh, by the way, Rinku Sen, who I interviewed earlier in the season, who is the executive director of the Narrative Initiative, was one of the leaders at Race Forward. So if you see this thread working its way through, it's obviously it's not a coincidence. Mm-hmm. These organizations are trying to create narratives that help us build a broad base of power to advance social justice, mm-hmm. and to create a vocabulary behind that. So Race Forward does it. Jeff has done it in a variety of areas in his life, through his journalism, through his books, through his cultural commentary. And then Rinku has done it across these places, and now she's helping to lead Narrative Initiative in advancing that work too. And that also includes helping other people understand how to use narrative, and helping to identify narratives that are particularly powerful or which offer opportunities.
Well, and Jeff, in that work, the work of the Butterfly Lab at Race Forward is such a cool approach, right? This idea of building narrative that supports humanity for migrants, refugees, immigrants, and advancing freedom and justice for all. And if folks want to check out some of the work that's come from that, the Butterfly Project has actually created a narrative toolkit, a narrative design toolkit that folks can get their hands on. And I would be curious, Eric, I mean, give me your take on narrative design. And is narrative design almost an upscaled version of communications planning? You know what I mean? Like is it how would you place narrative in the continuum of this entire set of things that we're talking about? Does narrative pull the lens back even further and think about how all the actors get arrayed and just, tell me about that.
I don't know. This is a hard one, Kirk, because I think narrative is one of those things that's almost impossible to define. And so therefore, at the very least, I won't be wrong because there is no definition. I'll take a stab at it, which is it is the ability to connect based on shared experience or shared stories, or stories with which we can connect. I'm not a person who lived through the freedom struggle of the 60s, but the story that created is something that I now can internalize and understand how change occurred through that set of activities and that set of belief structures and the stories that emanated from that moment. In a sense, it's creating a shorthand between you and your audience, and that I'm telling a story that you're familiar with or that you can connect with on an emotional level that has a deeper meaning that goes to it. Our old narratives in our history, the Horatio Alger narrative of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and that anybody can make it as long as they work hard and play by the rules. That is a long time narrative that has managed to persist to this day, even though it is not true. And now I'm not saying that you should create narratives that are not true. I think that's the real challenging part of narrative, is that someone can come up with an alternative narrative that becomes incorporated into our belief structure, into our systems, into our politics, into our laws. And counteracting those things are really challenging. They're really difficult. But I think that that's the point of what we're trying to do now, is to help people better understand. So there is a counter narrative now. Let's just say the 1619 Project is a really good example, helping people understand how the institution of slavery has shaped every decision that has been made for the last 400 years.
Yeah.
That is, they are helping us to understand how things happened. So that's an example of, I don't know if you want to call it a counter narrative, but maybe it's just a truer narrative. Now, that's a fairly long-winded answer to something that can't be explained in a sense, but I think we are all in our work trying to come up with new ways to communicate that connect on important levels that will lead us to an important set of changes.
Well, and I feel like in your conversation with Jeff, he actually started with, that notion of America idea. And it's like, this notion of America has been an ideal and a weapon all of this time. And I think that's another really powerful expression of this notion of narrative and how it becomes woven into our cultural fabric. So I want to.
But thanks for asking me what is narrative.
Well, we're going to keep coming back to it, right? We have to keep coming back to it. So here I want to make a proposal. I want to make a proposal because I have the benefit of having been part of.
I'm going to have to do work, right?
Things that have not. Yes, because I've been part of things that have not been published yet. But I feel like the conversation around relationships, in race, in communications, in narrative, it's woven through so many of these episodes, both that we've heard and then some that are coming. And I know we don't do panels at Let's Hear It because it's really hard to have multiple voices at once. But man, I want to do a series of panel episodes where some of these folks we've talked to get a chance to talk to each other, because the themes are so powerful, right? And you know what I'm alluding to, because there's some stuff that hasn't been published yet that is coming, but like some of these, and by the way, these people are so smart.
They are
right? Come
smart.
on, let's put them on air.
By the way, they're smarter than we are, Kirk. So
Well-
there's that, which is nice. Yes, you're right. You've often said that our guests speak to each other through the show, and sometimes maybe we'll even get them to speak to each other. To each other. Well, okay, we'll see, Kirk. You're excellent. It's a fabulous idea. We'll see.
It's a fabulous idea, assuming you'll take the time and put the work in to make it happen. So the person we know who's doing the real work is Jeff Chang. Jeff, what a contributor. And man, Jeff, thank you for coming to Let's Hear It. Thank you for talking to us. And Eric, thank you for reaching out to Jeff and bringing him on, because that was a conversation for the ages and will continue to be. Yes?
Yes, that was great. And Jeff, thank you so much. And let's go to an A's game.
Okay, everybody, that's it for this episode. Please let us know if you have any thoughts about what you heard today or people we should have on this show, and that definitely includes yourself. And we'd like to thank
John Beltrano, our enthusiastic production assistant.
John Ali, the tuneful and inspiring composer of our theme music.
Our sponsors, the Communications Network and the Lumina Foundation.
And please check out Lumina's terrific podcast, Today's Students, Tomorrow's Talent, and you can find that at luminafoundation.org.
We certainly thank today's guest and, of course, all of you.
And most importantly, thank you, Mr. Brown.
Oh, no. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Okay, everybody, until next time.
Let's hear it.